So Hendrik, why don't we get started? I'm going to do a quick little introduction on CareStack, and then we'll get started. Again, this is the only commercial part of the evening. So my name is Jim Gerson. I represent CareStack. We are a 100% cloud-based solution for the complete management of the dental practice, and we typically find ourselves working with two types of groups. The first is growing, having success. They're ambitious. They see technology as giving themselves a competitive advantage, and they just need a little bit of help. They're not sure how to get there. The second type of group, is unfortunately not having that kind of success. They're typically either frustrated and aggravated by managing a multitude of software subscriptions that layer on top of their legacy on-premise software for things like electronic claims or remote onboarding, or they're not able to give accurate estimates at the time of treatments because their insurance mechanism is broken and they're chasing revenue. And this leads to sleepless nights, frustration for the ownership. So do us a favor. If you fall into one of those two buckets, go to carestack.com, learn a little bit more, and book a demo with our team. We'd love to show you what the capabilities of CareStack are. I'm going to turn it over to our co-sponsor, Darby Dental, and my colleague, Andrea Height. I want to thank Darby. Without their support, this evening wouldn't be possible. And Andrea, please take it away for a quick introduction on Darby.
Good evening, everyone. It is such a pleasure to co-host these presentations with our partner, CareStack. Over the last several months, Darby has created a whole new approach of business solutions and purchasing plans specific to the DSO business challenges in this very dynamic economic market in which we're finding ourselves. And part of this is bringing these kinds of presentations and information to help you with achieve your goals. So I really am so excited to get to our presenters. I just want to say the new things we have at Darby, totally awesome. Please check us out and we'll move on to introducing our wonderful team for this evening. So firstly, I would like to present Hendrik Lai, who is the co-founder and principal consultant of Sage Dental Consulting. He has sat in every chair in the dental office, from the patient position through the dentist. We're both from Australia, which means we're really awesome. And we both attended the same dental school, but in different decades. So Hendrik, in the name of helping solve the challenges he's been seeing in practice, started his own consulting company, and it's been just delightful to work with him and learn about him. So you'll see his contact information at the end of this. Now I'm going to go to Sina, and very excited to introduce Sina. With more than 15 years of cross-sector and cross-functional expertise in the US and the Canadian healthcare industries, a decade of which has been dedicated exclusively to advancing dentistry. Prior to his current leadership role as the Vice President of Business and Development Partnerships at Zentist, Sina served as the Vice President of Strategic Markets to some of the leading cloud-based enterprise software companies, serving multi-location dental service providers across North America and Europe. His senior leadership experience also includes running the national operations of a private equity-funded dental support organization, and throughout his career, Sina has personally delivered over 100 continuing education accredited seminars. So honored to have him be part of the team this evening. Now, Paulina, who is also from Zentist, is one of those people who worked in the healthcare background in a broad set of areas for a long time, from clinical engagement to biomedical to insurance administration to private healthcare, and found herself frustrated with a number of issues and processes that programs and clinical go through. So she decided she would step in and find and deliver solutions. So she is a co-founder of Zentist, and that isn't the first thing she's done. With her frustration with the lack of interoperability in healthcare, especially in software when you're trying to coordinate patient care. She founded a digital consulting firm called Practice to help ease these kinds of burdens. So once again, broad experience from a number of different aspects with a strong focus as we look at billing tonight in this particular area. Once again, I'm very excited to get acquainted with this team as well. And lastly, we've got Stephen Johnson who is the Executive Vice President of Veridi and a core member who helped launch Veridi in the spring of 2017. Veridi is a specialized software company that blends traditional patient financing with non-traditional payment guarantee plans. Stephen, I have to learn more about that. As a result, Veridi can provide payment options to 100% of the marketplace. And this is so exciting as well, because we're seeing a lot in newsletters about how funding for patient care and patient lack of ability to pay is meaning that some of these patients are not getting the care they need. So we're really excited to have him join us as well. So prior to leading Veridi's efforts, he spent the better part of a decade as president of Credit International Corporation, a legal accounts receivable management company that specialized in civil judgment. After graduating from the University of Washington in 2005, he led sales efforts in both corporate America and at several startups. Stephen is a veteran of the United States Army and currently lives in Washington State with his wife and 3 children. And again, Stephen, with a son who is also a veteran, thank you for your service, and we honor your contribution that way as well. And with that, I'm going to turn the rest of the hosting over to the wonderful Dr. Hendrik Lai.
Thank you very much for that sort of very, very warm introduction. And what we'll do is we will move straight into our panel with just a quick introduction as to our panel today. So our panel today is going to be speaking about sort of largely revenue cycle management as it relates to cash flow and how we can provide tools and tips to improve the cash flow into your practices or your groups. Now, as we all know, cash is everything. We know we need to have it, and we do love to have it. But how do we measure, how well we're doing in terms of our cash flow and how well our revenue cycle management processes are working? We want to know what kind of benchmarks we are looking for to attain, and it would be really good to get a sense from our panel as to what kind of metrics do our audience members need to capture in terms of being able to measure what a good, healthy cash flow and revenue cycle management team looks like. So perhaps, Sienna, in your experience, what kind of metrics would you encourage our audience members to capture?
So I'm going to start with the basics. I've worked with solo practices as well as down groups throughout my career. And it's evident that there's a lot of solo practices to this day that don't know their top line net production and their monthly and weekly net production, because they're often not looking at the financial statements. And so I would start with, looking at your total revenue, looking at your total EBITDA, which is the operating cash flow of the business. Once you understand those 2 numbers and you want to dig a little bit deeper into the insurance portion of your current revenue, you want to ask yourself, what is the current percentage out of my total net revenue that's coming from insurance payments versus fee for service, right? Directly from patients. And once you know that split, the next question here is, what is your current AR outstanding? And you can bucket those into 30, 60, and 90-day increments. And the goal here would be to really reduce the number of days outstanding, or the sales days outstanding pertaining to your current AR, your accounts receivable from the various insurance companies. But don't ignore the patient portion as well, because what we often see is practices that will sometimes focus on insurance AR 1 week and let their patient AR balloon because they're chasing dollars from payers. And then when they then focus on the patient AR, what happens is the insurance AR balloons. And so you want to look at both of those. And I think Stephen will have some great discussion points around what you can do to kind of minimize the patient portion of this particular payment from the standpoint of liability. And then if you want to dig even deeper, you want to look at your denials rate on insurance payments. So if you look across the various payers that you have, what percentage of your current claims are being denied on first submission? Or the opposite way of looking at it is, what is the first pass rate of those claims? Meaning, when you submit a claim for the first time, is it getting accepted by the payer, or are you seeing a denial? And if you're seeing a denial, how long is it taking your organization or your practice to remediate that denial?
Now, I think those are really, really good points there. And I think, when you mention that you want to obviously reduce the amount of AR into those buckets, in my experience, the sort of target is we don't want any more than 20% of our AR in that 60+ bucket. Would you agree with that kind of number, or what are you seeing in your experience?
So I would say in general, and I'll let Paulina comment on this as well, you don't want certainly more than 20% to be beyond 60 days. And the truth is that the longer time lapses, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to collect payments from both payers as well as patients. And I'm sure Stephen has experienced this a lot with the practices that he works with, where trying to address patient AR, right, 9 months down the road is very difficult. And so the question I have for everybody listening to this webinar is, when you look across your practice, how quickly, again, are you getting to those denied claims? And believe it or not, there's a lot of practices that feel that they've submitted a claim and it's made it to the payer, when in fact there is no claim on file. So one of the things that we do at Zentist is we automate the status checking related to claim submissions, because we find a big portion of the time, the office manager or the front desk team member or somebody working at a centralized office for the DSO, they believe that the payers received the claim, but the claim's never made it to the payer. And there's various reasons for that, right? But both the practice management software as well as the clearinghouses have a technology stack. And there are times where claims can get stuck throughout their journey and never make it to the other side.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point there, Sina, and I think it's actually really good to define for our audience how big a problem this AR really is. In my experience, the each office on average carries about $120,000 to $125,000 in AR, and you scale that across 100 locations. Now we're not really talking pocket change anymore. Is that sort of in line with what you see at Zentist with you and Paulina?
Well, the average practice in the US today, right, does roughly $750,000 to $850,000 in revenue based on the IRS data. And if you want to look at whether that number is higher or lower, I know the practices that often dentist entrepreneurs are buying, they're more like in the 1.5 million and higher range. And so it's all proportionate to your total revenue. But I would say most of the practices that we work with at Zentist, when we get under the hood, what we realize is there is more than 100 grand of AR sitting there. And many times we get asked, can you help us with the aging buckets? Because that's where a lot of the money has been tied. And what's happened is many times, because there's been a lot of changeover given the pandemic with front desk staff, right? It's been hard to have consistency for the AR follow-up. And this is where a lot of practices and DSOs and dental groups look for a partner to help them with that AR. But when we look at the AR, we have to really be realistic with regards to what percentage of it is recoverable, because like I said, there are issues with claims that become so aged, right, that payers may not even make the payments because it's lapsed over a certain period of time.
Absolutely. And Paulina, I guess, is that sort of in line with your experience as well, as both a practice owner and somebody who's very, very deeply involved in that revenue cycle management sort of aspect of the industry?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, I think that you mentioned a benchmark about 20, no more than 20% over the 60 plus days. Another way to look at it is you want less and less and less going forward, right? So less than between 5 to 10% in your 90 plus days is a really the ultimate benchmark you are looking for. So if you're not there, and most of us are not, and let's be honest, it's a benchmark to aim for. And so we actually have a poll question related to this. I think there is currently a poll question up about your role in the dental practice. So if I think that will definitely help us gauge, who we're talking to, first of all, but we actually have a follow-up question as well, which is, how many people actually are hitting this benchmark, and do you even know your numbers? A lot of times, as if you're a provider or if you are really involved in so many other aspects of the practice, this is one of those like willful ignorance kind of items. And but as we're mentioning, the longer you wait, the less collectible it becomes. And so certainly
Hey, Paulina, sorry to interrupt. Jim here. These poll questions are anonymous, guys. We got terrible performance on the first poll. I mean, come on, get off your hands. Use your keyboard. So this one's anonymous here. I just want to make sure everyone is aware of that. No one's keeping track. We can't see who's saying yes and no or putting themselves in a certain category.
Okay, so I just pulled up the question. I know
this is the second one. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's
okay.
So this is your current insurance aging greater than one average month's net production? Right. So that means that your total AR you shouldn't have more than what you're making in just a single month. That will keep you on top of things, right? You're not looking for your you make as much in 1 month as you have in your AR. So that means that your collections each month will kind of roll month to month to month, and your collections and production are in sync. You can meet that 100% collection goal. If it's going to be a lot higher than that, then you're collecting on maybe old debt. If it's a lot lower than that, you're going to have some significant cash flow issues. That's what really that metric is telling you.
And I think in addition to, that really good point you made there, Paulina, that sort of ratio of 1.0 in terms of your accounts receivable ratio, that is sort of what we target for, in my experience, a general practice. The type of practice is going to impact that particular ratio. So we tend to see, for example, lower ratios for ortho practices where a lot is collected up front. And then in oral surgery practices, just by the nature of what they do, and then having to bill to medical insurance in some cases, we can see that ratio increase significantly as well. So although there are some prompt pay laws that have come into effect, which should bring that back to a more manageable level, but just be aware it does, in my experience, tend to be the rule of thumb for general practices, and it will vary according to the type of practice. Is that your experience too, Paulina?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, we want to take any payment plans or ortho, extended payment types of procedures kind of as a separate part of AR, but ultimately we're looking at what is collectible, right? We're looking at the adjusted production, and we're looking at what we're expecting to collect that month as that benchmark percentage.
That's I think really, really good points that you've made there. And I think it helps to sort of provide a little bit of context around, what our audience members should be aiming for in terms of a healthy sort of accounts receivable ratio, which in turn affects their cash flow. So obviously, we're talking here both in terms of payer side AR as well as a guarantor side AR, and obviously, providers have to deal with both the guarantor and provider sides. And obviously, I want to sort of get some input from Stephen from the guarantor side, as well as having spoken a little bit about that payer side with Sina there. So, there's some sort of fairly sobering statistics in terms of the number of accounts receivable on average over 90 days is about 18% of the total active accounts. And then as we move to sort of accounts, or the number of accounts receivable in terms of active accounts over 90 days in practices without a patient financing option, it's about 28%. And those with a patient financial option, it's about half of that, so about 14%. So I guess, with that in mind, it's pretty clear that having sort of some sort of robust patient financing sort of options certainly improves your account's performance. So I guess, Stephen, in your experience, what kind of patient financing options should dental offices look to offer their patients to help improve that accounts receivable performance?
Yes. Well, thank you, Hendrik. And I think there's obviously a number of providers out there that offer different types of pay over time plans, more traditionally on the financing side, right? Let's provide an application to a patient so that they can afford the treatment that they need. And hopefully that, dentist is paid in a day or two later for those that qualify. I think Paulina spoke to it a moment ago where, there's the difference between some of the, insurance AR and then payment plan AR. And what we like to do is, try to simplify dental offices' lives where you combine that financing approach with a pay over time approach. I think every dentist would agree getting paid today is the ideal situation, right? No one's trying to argue with, the cash at this very moment. But when you limit yourself to purely just like one financing option and nothing else, you limit the opportunities for the patients to qualify. And so, we feel very strongly about providing a number of options so that more patients can say yes to the treatments that you offer. So, obviously, we like what we provide here at Verity, but I think more in terms of dental offices following a procedure, if you will, of always talking about what's available to the patient the second the patient is hesitant to pay for services today, right? You always want to push, what does it cost for the treatment now? But the second that somebody isn't ready to make that decision or is hesitant or is looking for excuses, because the reality is most patients aren't going to raise their hand and say, hey, I don't have the money today to afford this treatment. What kind of payment plans will you offer me? We really encourage the dental offices to, again, kind of follow a procedure of, we're always looking to take money today. If the patient isn't going to pay us today, let's look at financing options. If the patient doesn't qualify for financing, here's some additional payment plan options that we can provide. Following that 1, 2, 3 approach, whether you're a DSO or an individual practice, makes such a huge difference to your bottom line and the cash flow that you can generate, because you don't want to rely on one person at the front office who hates talking about money with their patients. And then you have the other office manager, maybe at the same location or a different location, and she looks at it from an altruistic standpoint, like, what can I do to help more people? And she does a fantastic, or he does a fantastic job of offering those options. And lo and behold, more patients opt into those options, and thus creating a greater cash flow situation for those practices. So, we think it's very important for, dentists to empower their staff to make sure that they're talking about kind of that 1, 2, 3 approach, and they're not cherry picking who am I going to talk to about it and who I'm not, right? It's just, this is what we offer, 1, 2, 3 every single time. And when you follow that, you're going to see a significant boost in your production.
Well, I think that's really, really, really good points there, Stephen. And I think, as you said, that it's always better to have the cash today. And you did mention sort of pay over time options. Do those options have like a negative impact on cash flow in dental offices and groups more broadly in your experience? I would think, that could in some cases pose a problem, but what's your experience?
Yeah, so our experience is when you offer a pay over time option, and again, like I said, that's kind of option number 3. Behind pay today and get somebody qualified for financing. But we strongly believe that it's a lot better to get paid over time than it is to get paid nothing today. And so, yes, you will increase kind of that patient AR situation. Companies like ours, for instance, we take the risk out of it because we offer what's called a guaranteed payment plan. So in the event that a patient stops making their payment, there's companies like ours that will step in and continue to make that payment. So it's a risk-free pay over time option. Yes, you're not getting funded, 90% of the money for the crown today, but you are providing a stream of revenue over time, and the revenue that you'll generate from that plan far exceeds what the cost of the actual treatment is, from a hard cost perspective. So, and when you offer payment plans, most people that's not their first choice, right? People don't, when they can help it, they would prefer not to pay their dentist on a monthly payment plan over the next 6, 9, 12, 24 months. So it is for unique circumstances. It is a far smaller percentage of individuals that will opt into that. But when we're talking about, what would boosting your production by 10% look like to your bottom line month over month, that's a huge number. And when you only let 60, 70, 80% of your patients qualify for treatment, and you can move that needle from 80% to 85 or 90%, that's a huge difference, from an annualized standpoint. And so, yes, let's give money today. Let's offer financing, but dentists and dental offices should not be afraid of the pay over time plan, especially if it's guaranteed, meaning if the patient stopped making their monthly payment, that the provider steps in and continues to make that payment.
And I would imagine there, Stephen, one of the caveats around that pay over time is that the length of time is somewhat limited. We're not talking, 10 years to pay your a pay over time sort of model. It'd be much more abbreviated than that. So maybe the impact on cash flow is somewhat limited because of that period. Would that be correct?
Yes. So like in our model, we give the parameters between 6 and 24 months, but it's actually the actual term is decided by the dental practice. So the patient can't always select a 24-month option because the dental office can control what that looks like. So for a plan that's maybe $1,000, you might not want to go beyond 6 or 9 months. If we're talking about a $4,000 treatment plan, to better serve that patient and make that a monthly payment that they can afford, perhaps 18 to 24 months is a better option. So there's some flexibility provided. And again, if offices and, you should work with the partner that you choose, but, dictate what kind of procedure that you're going to present based on perhaps the cost of treatment and what you're comfortable from a pay over time duration.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, those are really, really great points. And I think, we've talked about patient financing as a tool, that we can help to sort of drive healthy cash flow from something the provider can do. But I guess this is a question for you, Sina. In addition to the third-party patient financing platforms, what other sort of opportunities or challenges do you see from an RCM standpoint on the provider side of the industry?
So it's apparent to me that there's a lot of practices that don't understand how to build medical plans. And I know this is something that Pauline and I believe is a huge gap in the industry, where for certain procedures, you have the opportunity, right, for a dental procedure, if it's a medical necessity, to build a medical plan. And so as we add additional streams of revenue to our practices, particularly when dental groups are looking to bring in some of these specialties in-house, the question here becomes, how well versed is your billing team in understanding the various procedure codes and the claim submission processes for the specific payers by type? And then in addition to that, the other area that we see a lot of practices struggling with has to do with the fact that when they are dealing with denials, when it comes to understanding what information is missing from those first claim submissions, how good is their current practice management system? And so one of the challenges that we often see with dental groups is, as they're adding additional practices with different practice management software, what's happening is when they're trying to centralize their revenue cycle management, they're having to deal with a different workflow, because each practice that is on a different practice management software right, may have a different process for claim submission. And so companies like CareStack and others that are providing an enterprise solution can have significant value when you're looking at standardizing RCM workflows. But the way that we have decided to pursue this opportunity at Zentis is build a software that is willing and able to work with the different practice management systems that you may have today. And should you go with a cloud-based option like CareStack, the question here is, how does it assist, right, your current operations in addition to what great companies like CareStack are doing? And so what we find is just the data structure being different across locations presents issues really when it comes to streamlining RCM, and having a platform that can translate the data into one language often assists. And I'll give you a specific example, Hendrik. Today, if you're looking to pull EOBs from the portals, right, the insurance portals, you're having to train your team members to read different EOBs because not all EOBs are the same across various payers like Delta and Cigna. And so the learning curve to learn different EOB formats is not a short one. And what we have done at Zentis is map the various EOBs to one standard format. And so when we present that data to a practitioner or the front office staff, they're only having to learn one format of an explanation of benefit statement. And why is that helpful? Because, well, it helps them make posting a lot easier, right? When they have only one EOB format to learn, they can post payments much more quickly.
I think those are really good points there about, having I guess a universal system. And then I think, to your point about streamlining the revenue cycle management process, I think that's a really, really good point to bring up, because I think in my experience, it costs the average office about $12 per month per account to sort of manage. And, I think that the nature of dental being somewhat labor intensive opens up a lot of opportunity in terms of automation through that revenue cycle management process. Where do you see, where do you and Paulina, from your revenue cycle management experience, where do you see opportunities for automation within that revenue cycle? I guess more specifically, how do you feel technology can assist with that automation as well?
Paulina, do you want to take that question? I think it's right up your alley.
Sure. So automation opportunities, like Hendrik was saying, is everywhere. I mean, I love to throw in a spot of industry research in there just so we kind of know how this problem is kind of quantified, right? But we know that just in the last 2 years, the industry can the volume of dollars that we're spending and losing to manual transactions and such as depositing paper checks, right? Or spending that extra time logging into so many different portals, or even in cases where you're creating payment plans, you're manually drafting them in Office, trying to keep track, in a binder because you don't have softwares to deal with this really effectively. All of this is contributing to this RCM slowdown. We know that there's $327 million that can be saved just from improving what's all these kind of older processes. It's not doing more procedures or anything like that. It's just money that we're all spending trying to deal with these problems. And so by look at all of those areas that we just touched upon, right, from the whole patient experience, the second you create that claim, are you actually leveraging all of those automatic submission tools? Are you signed up for EFTs and signed up for insurance portals across all of the payers that you use heavily? Do you have a single point of access for all of those, all that information? There's a lot of logins, and I know you're resetting them left and right, and who has the last version of this login? Yeah, it's easy to deal with, but sending a communication back and forth and an email back and forth, that time adds up. And so what the industry research tells us is you can save up to between 2 to 4 minutes per transaction. So whether that's paying, a patient portion that you're receiving by check, or they phone in the payment, or we're submitting claims and you're having to post that payment manually, or look for that payment, right? Look for that EOB to actually explain it to the patient. All of these things add up. And if you're looking at how many transactions you're processing on the daily, on the weekly, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's how you're contributing to this whole $327 million mess, right? So Of course, there's the claim status updates after you submit the claim. And then, of course, actually making sense of where your insurance payments money is coming from. There's so many different sources. You're getting payments in forms of EFTs if you have those set up. And maybe even that's a mystery, because if you have providers coming in left and right and you're credentialing all over the place, it's kind of a mystery, where is that payment? Did it go to the right practice? If you're in multiple practices, did it go to the right bank account? It can be kind of hairy. So really organizing that without putting in all of that effort is, or even just a one-time effort, to actually get it set up correctly so that you don't have to worry about it on an ongoing basis. As staff turn over or come in, you have a single source of training, a tool, any kind of tool like the cloud softwares and tools like Zentis, can really help make that easier to manage. And you also tee it up for that one time. And then of course, as the insurance payments come in, offering solutions to manage that patient portion and that delicate balance that Sina was mentioning in the beginning, to not let one go while you're working on the other one. These are all, we call it a target rich environment, right? You can really focus on any one little area and make significant improvements. And a lot of times people in the practice don't really focus on these areas because it's one of those, it doesn't feel broken, so we don't want to go out of our way to change up these processes because that change is difficult, but that's where you're leaking a lot of money. And it's so easy to not focus on it because you're focused on that angry patient who's right in front of you, right? So, but these operational things are really those repeated costs that you're not going to see that are going to make a huge impact on that bottom line and that cash flow ultimately that you're experiencing on the day-to-day.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Paulina. With such big numbers at play, we only really need to affect a small percentage change. Like, if we could just recapture 10% of that sort of outstanding sort of money that's on the table, that's nearly what, 37 million? Is that about right? Yeah, and
Yeah, sure.
those
And that's
real,
not right.
real
And think
goals.
about it. We're not doing more procedures. We're not trying to fundamentally change up other expenses. We're not cutting huge costs in terms of other things we're buying. This is just making enhancements where we have to do this. We have to do this process to get paid. So how about we make that as easy as, I say, buy a muffin through your through your Apple Pay, right? It needs to be as straightforward as all of these other consumer experiences that we currently have.
Yeah, so basically we're just trying to collect the money that we've already earned. So that's perfect. Well, I mean, I think those are amazing points, and thank you for sharing that information. And one of the things that I'd like to touch on as well is from both the payer side and sort of guarantor side. Stephen, maybe starting with you, from a guarantor or patient side, are you seeing any sort of trends within the industry in terms of what kind of financing options are being offered? Is there sort of a move towards or away from different sort of lengths of time or different different terms within patient financing?
Well, one of the trends that we have seen is a lot of the banks, the lenders, tightening up as far as what they will lend, from either a dollar amount to a percentage amount. And so that's kind of, again, Hendrik, to go back to what we talked about earlier, is just, having more of those options available to you. Because if 65% of people used to, qualify for traditional financing, and now only 43% of people are, qualifying for traditional financing, and you're sticking with the exact same option that you offered 10 years ago, you're losing out on the ability to, again, help more people say yes to the treatment that you're offering. So I think from we are definitely in the age of people signing up for all types of subscriptions and pay over time models. So people are not accustomed to or unaccustomed to breaking up treatment into monthly payments. So again, when you offer some of those plans that provide more of those options, you're going to help more people and you're going to increase production. And I say that again because it's very true. So having those options available, you're going to serve more people. But the market is a little uncertain, and I think a lot of people are talking about that right now, and credit's going to continue to tighten. And so by being creative in how you can help more patients afford the services that you provide is going to be very helpful.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there in that, patients really just want assistance in having an affordable monthly payment. I know that in a lot of the offices I consult with, there's a drive for office managers and treatment coordinators to want to offer the 0% sort of interest payment. But, in my experience, patients don't really necessarily care about 0% interest. What they care about is having a monthly payment that they can afford to make, whether it's at 0% or whatever percentage rate comes with it. And obviously the downside of 0% interest to the patient means that the financer has to make it up somewhere else, right? So they charge the office a higher discount rate.
Correct. I mean, so the way that a lot of what you're referring to is same as cash, as it's commonly discussed on our side of the industry, is the discount rate to the merchant can be higher. So that is potentially one drawback. It costs more money to offer a plan like that in some instances. The challenge for some of the patients is it's usually offered over a promotional period. So let's say it's a $5,000 dental treatment package, and it's on a 12-month same as cash. But the term might actually be like 24 or 36 months. So really, it's kind of like that balloon payment from the kind of the mortgage crisis from 2008, where hey, we're trying to get somebody to if you pay this $5,000 off in 12 months, you pay $0 in additional interest. However, if you stretch that to 13 or months or beyond, then you retroactively start paying that higher APR of 24 or 30%. So for an individual who truly just needs a couple of months before they pay off the remainder of the plan, a same as cash option is great, right? Because they truly won't pay any more additional interest. And in some cases for the merchant, if it's a lower term, like 6 or 12 months, they might not pay that much additional. If a dentist offers a 18 or 24 month same as cash option to a patient, they could pay a considerable amount more. So it's really, but again, it kind of goes back to that flexibility, like how flexible are you? What kind of options are you going to provide? And when I say options, I don't mean like work with 12 different companies. I talked to a dentist in Dallas just the other day, and he was very excited to tell me that he worked with like every company under the sun. But I think that creates a lot of drag on the actual like office manager world, right? And again, I think Paulina was talking about like how many logins are you going to remember and how many options you're going to put people through. And at the end of the day, you want to save time. So when you can streamline an approach to offer financing backed by guaranteed payment plans, and you're just using one patient application to move through that process, that saves people a lot of time and the office a lot of headache. And that's certainly something we like to promote.
Oh, no, that's really, really good information that you've shared there, and really, really appreciate it. And I mean, I guess, Sina, from, the payer side, do you have any sort of inside trends that you want to share with our audience that you're seeing coming down the payer side of the revenue cycle sort of coin?
Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of peers implement artificial intelligence for the purposes of adjudicating claims and looking at those x-rays that are coming through and identifying whether or not, right, that particular procedure was a necessity. And the payers have a chief dental officer. I know, Hendrik, you spent part of your career on that side of the world. And we're seeing a lot of technology-related investments on the part of payers to really streamline, right, the way that they adjudicate these claims. And what that means is that you have to be much smarter as a provider going forward in getting around creative denials. And when I say creative denials, it's payers looking at ways that they can legally, right, reject that claim. And now it's up to you. They've kicked the ball, right, to your side of the court. Now it's up to you to make the argument that this claim should be paid. And I believe payers are very in tune with the fact that we're having turnover at the dental practice, right? And they know that if the claim is denied, the chances of, right, every practice resubmitting that claim on time is not 100%. So my question to everybody on this webinar is, if you're on the provider side of the industry, knowing that the payers are spending millions of dollars in improving their technology automation capabilities, how are you investing in technology to manage creative denials that are going to get more and more frequent? In addition to that, we're seeing a lot of providers spend way too much time on the phone with payers, trying to get a simple status update on a claim, right? Spending more than 60 minutes on a phone with Delta. Meanwhile, you spend $9,000 on a marketing campaign, and that phone rings and your office manager misses the inbound phone call. What's the opportunity cost associated with tying up your time on these calls with the payers, where you could be dealing instead with booking patients in the chair, right? Or dealing with the aftercare for a patient that just came in for a procedure. So from that perspective, look at ways to automate the way that you obtain data from the payers and reduce the amount of time that your staff have to spend on those repetitive tasks. And so we're seeing some of the practices that have started to realize that administrative expenses associated with following up with payers, we're seeing those practices invest in technology. But I don't think it's anywhere near the size of investment that payers are making in automation to improve their margins in their business, right? And unfortunately, that can be to the detriment of the providers.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that, Sina. I just want to dig down into that just a little bit. So with this investment that payers are making into artificial intelligence for claims adjudication, in your experience and Paulina's experience, are you seeing an increase in the number of denials or a reduction in the clean claims that are going through?
Yes. I love the statistics, the fun facts that, I think give me so much insight into where the trends actually are. So we do see that these payers that are investing heavily in making their processes more efficient are really hurting providers. And the one thing, that I really like to tell everybody is that dental insurance, unlike the healthcare industry and medical insurances, are not subject to a lot of laws around, what percentage of premiums you actually have to use. It's called a medical loss ratio. And this is not something the dental industry talks about a lot, but it really exists. Any insurance company has to pay a certain percentage back towards actual dental services. In dentistry, we don't actually have any kind of laws that force payers or hold them accountable to actually spending a certain amount on the actual providing dental services. And so one really, really crazy statistic is that there are dental insurance companies out there that spend as little as 4% of their income on actual dental services. That means all of that. That's really astounding. And that should actually make all of us really think about the role that dental insurance has in affordability for dental care in a lot of cases. Obviously, that's not the average. That's not anything it's not what you see across the board, but consider that in medical, for example, even though they're huge companies, they're still spending 80% of the premiums that they make back into paying for services. But if you have a dental payer, a smaller or maybe unknown insurance company that is actually making 96% of that and spending it on administrative costs and all these other arbitrary things, they're not paying for your patient's care. And so clearly, if they're able to get away with something like that, they're running a very profitable enterprise off of these insurance premiums, and they're not paying for your care or your patient's care. So on the whole, it affects, downstream what they're going to have to pay out of pocket, and it affects the providers and what they're able to get their patients coverage for. And so a statistic like that really, to me, shouldn't exist. And so this is where the providers come into play, where we actually have to spend some time and thought into how we do this. It's no longer as simple as, filling in a couple blanks and just getting that check in the mail. It's gotten really complicated. And because they have these AI tools these payers can implement on their side, they're able to make submissions more and more complicated. And if you haven't experienced that, then, it's definitely there. You're going to get denied for a lot of really sometimes just small clerical errors that you think are ridiculous, but it's not. It is intentional, on their part, because the longer they drag out that process, you have to think about them as an enterprise and as a business. It's very much intentional on their front. And so if you as a provider are not armed with enough tools to tackle that, it's going to come out of your pockets as well as the patients, and it kind of harms everybody else.
Oh, wow. I mean, that is a pretty sobering sort of number there, 4%. And I think a lot of our audience members can really sort of relate to that level of reimbursement that they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. So no, well, thank you for sharing that. That's really, really interesting information to share. An area that, as I was going around and speaking to a few of my colleagues about this panel, one of the questions that popped up was, what is an ERA? And when I hear ERA, I think of earned run average, and that's clearly not what we're talking about here. And how was that then different from an EOB? Sienna, do you want to perhaps give us some idea about that?
Sure. So an ERA is the electronic version of an explanation of benefit. So the acronym ERA stands for Electronic Remittance Advice. And in our experience, less than 20% of all practices in the United States currently leverage ERAs, electronic remittance advice data, which you can obtain via platforms like Zentis. Less than 20% of all practices are using that to understand claim status information and to understand when they're going to get paid.
Okay.
And I'll let Paulina because she's been on the operating side of a dental practice, and I'll let her articulate why leveraging ERAs in this day and age is so critical to the financial health of your practice.
Yeah, so we kind of alluded to this a few times about how there's just so many different payers that you're working with, and they each have their own operating, MO, right? They have their own portals, they have their own EOB formats, they like things done a certain way for their own efficiency. And so without standardizing this, it starts to not make a whole lot of sense. I like to think about it from a consumer perspective, right? Like you have a ton of different bank accounts, ton of different credit cards, they have their own kind of system, but when you use a tool that kind of brings them together and you start looking at your own personal cash flow, your own expenses, it starts to make it much less complicated. You don't have to sit down and do your own books, right? And so in your own practices, you see this with a QuickBooks or other accounting type tools where you get to carry that similar experience over. And we see this in other tools, right? Maybe you've seen certain tools that bring your suppliers together into a single portal, so there's a lot of this kind of management or consolidation of these experiences. Another one I love just outside of dentistry is that all these fitness, classes and apps that you're trying to go to, and now you see them consolidated so you can book many different studios from a single place. We see this across the board. It's not just a healthcare phenomenon or anything like that. I mean, we see that we love the variety, but then the variety gets crazy. And so in a similar vein, we want to be able to try to take all of these different payers, because they're not going to leave our lives anytime soon. We're not going to just have a single payer. There are going to be many different options, but bringing them into a single location so that we can make sense of it all without really knowing how to operate with each single one is going to be that key to making it easier for yourself, for new people to learn, and then ultimately taking that information and making it actionable, right? It's ultimately, how do you explain to a patient? I think this is where we get stuck a lot is, how do we explain benefits to patients in a way that's digestible to them, that's understandable for the staff, and so that they truly understand the limitations of their own plans and ultimately what their responsibility is, and without having this in a very clear way to digest for your staff as well as to your patients, that's where we get the upset reviews. That's where we get confusion and deception and all these things that they kind of put onto the providers, when it's really not that. It's really a lot of times just really understanding the plans. And so having them, so at Zentis, we're taking all of this information across many different platforms and putting it into a single standard format, so that you don't have to necessarily have had 20 years of experience with one plan to know how to explain it. You know, we try to standardize it, normalize it, so that a normal person can look at this, read it, explain it, and maybe even show it to the patient, and be able to have a conversation about it in a meaningful way. So we know, well, now let's create a plan for this, right? Or maybe you didn't know that this plan was kind of terrible and not really what you needed. So maybe we can plan for a better, help you select a better plan. And then, and ultimately that goes into the how do we afford this, right? How do we talk about the other patient portions? So all of this stems from that initial effort to really organize things, make it consolidated, organize it, understand what we're actually looking at. And that's the mystery of insurance is, we all just want to understand it.
Absolutely. It is a bit of almost like black magic, isn't it? Sometimes insurance, we don't know what happens there, but sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I you've all been an amazing panel, and we are getting very close to time. I could talk to you for another 3 or 4 hours about this, our panelists. But I think we've had some great discussion today, and I would like to sort of ask our panelists, for our audience, what is your one takeaway that they can start implementing tomorrow in their businesses, to have a positive impact on their RCM and their cash flow? Would you like to sort of kick off, Paulina?
Oh. Sorry, I'm having sound issues.
Okay.
You're back, Paulina. We got you.
Oh, perhaps we can move. Oh, you're back. Perhaps we'll kick off with Sina then, while Paulina gets that sorted out.
I love to ask the question on every call that I'm on, with whether it's a solo practice or a DSO. Are you currently tracking your claims denial rate? And that denial rate never stays constant, right? So it's a KPI that you should be looking at. Or another way to look at it is, what is your first pass rate? And in most practices, you're spending dollars per hour paying your office managers and front desk. So most offices are not having their front desk on an annual salary. And what that means is, if your current team member has to come in on a Friday and for 2 hours just deal with resubmitting claims, they're getting paid, right? They're probably not going to necessarily complain to you. I've been on that side because I've managed multiple clinics, and knowing what that first pass rate really tells you what's the administrative expense of resubmitting these claims, and how often are we resubmitting and dealing with those denials, and how much is it truly costing us?
Well, no, that's great. And, we just had a question come through really quickly. So, what's the most efficient way to track denials in your experience?
Very, very difficult to do without having some sort of software or automation. You can put up a Google sheet and you can have a spreadsheet that tracks, right, by payer the denial rate, but you're relying on the front desk team member or whoever is doing your billing. Let's say you outsource it to a third party. You're relying on them to give you that data. And in my experience, having had regional managers that prior to moving to an analytics software used to fill out spreadsheets, right? My regional managers with an MBA would make mistakes on data entry. So let alone when you're dealing with an office manager that may be at a school for 3 years and is new to your office because the one you had retired during COVID. And so what we recommend is look at tools and technologies that can automate the tracking of this data. And I'm happy to follow up offline because it's a very lengthy discussion with regards to what are the different options in the market. And just to give you 2 buckets, there's analytics software that can help with some aspects of managing KPIs, but then there's specific platforms like CareStack and Zentis that can dive even deeper depending on what your data needs are.
Oh, perfect. No, those are amazing sort of tips to share there. Stephen, what is your one takeaway that our audience can start implementing tomorrow?
Yeah, so kind of following Sina's approach, is unscheduled treatment, right? Is the metric that people need to be looking at, and what percentage of those people, rather, you need to be offering a 1, 2, 3 approach that I discussed earlier to all of those people who don't have scheduled treatment, right? And that should be standard for everyone at the office that has financial conversations with patients. So is everyone in your office that has a financial conversation with the patient making sure that they offer payment in full, followed by financing, followed by some form of payment plan?
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that tip. And Paulina, do we have you back for your one takeaway?
I do. Sorry, I had a bit of a sound issue, but I say really try to eliminate any repetitive tasks that you're doing. I mean, it's kind of a theme of automation in general, is to really look at all of your operations. And if you're doing it repeatedly, there's probably an opportunity to improve that. So whether it's relating to your financials or not, I think we've already done this a lot with patient communications, with even text to pay, as it relates to RCM. There's a lot of things we're already doing, but then there's also all these other tasks that you're still doing repeatedly. So what are those, and tackle those one by one. And so of course, as it relates to us, I mean, we can help do things like setting up EFTs and ERAs so that you don't have to repeatedly do those tasks as new people come in. And so like automating your payment reconciliations, that's like a whole nother topic that is, you have to just do that continuously. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And one last thing I want to put out there is that just don't let patients leave without some sort of a plan in place. Whether it's did we send out their insurance claims? Did we follow up with everything that we needed? Because sometimes that claim didn't go out because their birthday was wrong, and it's been wrong in the system for the last 3 years, and every claim that you sent out has been rejected. Tackle all of those issues while the patient's in front of you. If you have to deal with a payment plan, do that while the patient's in front of you, and don't let any patient leave without some sort of actionable thing, whether it's on your side or their side, so that you get things moving along. You just got to clear those off your checklist.
Well, those are amazing tips there, and really thank you to all our panelists for sharing them.
I want to thank all of the panelists tonight for a great program.
And and
if you have any questions about tonight's program, or you want more details from Hendrik about our panelists tonight, the best way is to reach out to him via email at hendrik@sagedentalconsulting.com, or he's super active on LinkedIn, and you can find him on LinkedIn. That's another way to get a hold of Hendrik.
Absolutely. And our panelists are a wealth of resource, so please reach out if there's anything we can help with. And love to invite you to our final course of the series, which is the anatomy of a transaction, from financing to closing a deal. And
that's 2 weeks from today, correct? I think it is. All right, great.
2 weeks today.
Excellent. The best way to find out about this course is go to the CareStack Champions group in Facebook, go to darby.com, and you can register for the events there as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Really appreciate your time. And sorry we went over by a few minutes here.
Thank you, everyone. Absolutely wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.